The Cannabis Conversation. A European perspective on the emerging legal cannabis industry.
Welcome to the Cannabis Conversation with Anush Desai, where we explore the new legal cannabis industry by speaking to the professionals that are helping to shape it. Got a great show coming up today with a very smart guy called Arass from a company called Avicanna. We'll hear more about that in a minute, but I just wanted to give a quick shout to some good friends of mine in the industry. Bloom Jobs are Europe's leading recruitment agency. They have a database of over 14,000 high-quality applicants from complementary backgrounds who are looking to work in the cannabis industry. They source part-time and full-time specialists and team members across medical, business and plant touching. They obviously are working with quite a few European businesses, but at the moment they're also working with many North American companies who are looking to expand into Europe. Tom, Ellen and Nikita are some of my favorite people in this space. They're always really friendly and helpful, so they would love to chat to you if you are looking for a role in this industry or if you are looking to recruit in Europe. You can find them at bloomjobs.com. That's BLUMEJOBS.com. So head there and get in touch if you need. Cool. On with the show. Enjoy. On today's show, I have Aras Azadian, who's CEO of Avicanna. Avicanna are a Canadian biopharmaceutical company with a real focus on R&D. Arass, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
No, pleasure. How are you doing during these crazy times?
We're surviving. We're finding a way to progress and work, virtually, even though we're an international or multinational company. But it's functioning. I think everyone is adjusting to the new normal.
Yeah, I think you're right, which is good. Cool. Okay, well, look, let's get stuck in. Why don't we start with a bit about you, about your background and how you kind of got into the cannabis industry?
Yeah, sure. So my background is economics, business school. But when I came back from business school, which I went actually in Europe, in Barcelona, when I came back, I started working in the biotech sector. And I've been working in actually got the opportunity to work in Alzheimer's disease and in oncology. I learned a lot about the pharmaceutical pathway, the clinical development pathway of a drug. Learn really how biotech companies function from a regulations perspective and from an R&D perspective. And when we started Avicanna at the end of 2015, early 2016, we took that position towards the emerging sector at the time, which was to look at this really from a biopharmaceutical perspective. And that's how the company sort of was essentially developed.
Yeah, fantastic. Can you just explain a bit about what a biopharmaceutical company is versus just a straight pharmaceutical company?
You're more focused on the biological aspects of, I guess, from our perspective, of an active ingredient within the delivery. So a biopharmaceutical company could be a company that's working on a diagnostic platform using, for example, antibodies that are biological, so they're not synthetic, or using, in our case, active cannabinoids that are produced naturally from the plant. Yeah. So, there's a lot of different categories of pharmaceutical company. I think a pharma company essentially means a standardized delivery or a standardized, top level quality, whether it's a drug or it's a medical device or it's a solution. So I think pharmaceutical simply means of the highest standards. A biopharmaceutical company means that we're relying on natural ingredients or natural agents.
Sure. Great. Thank you for that. Cool. So maybe tell us a bit more about Avicanna, what you do, what's your revenue model, how's that sort of evolved over time?
Sure. So we've been in the sector for about 5 years, but the first 3 years was on the Canadian side was R&D, product development, product optimization, for us to really focus on developing and optimizing products that will provide cannabinoids in a more advanced way, meaning higher bioavailability, less of the products being wasted, or more targeted delivery, meaning if we want something to be sublingual, we want it to be absorbed through the tongue, that actually provides a similar sensation to inhalation, which makes it a great replacement for smoking. Or if we want to have a topical application, do we want that to be localized to provide dermatology sort of benefits, or do we want that to be deep tissue in a sense that then it's delivered into the muscles and joints? At the end, that's all pharmaceutical, that's all biopharmaceutical development, and that's all R&D. And when the sector was essentially born at a federal level here in Canada, the people were growing the flower. And then about a year and a half later or 2 years later, they permitted selling of oils. But when you think about it, quite primitive, the product offerings, right? And we're the year 2020 and we're going back to people inhaling an herb or, making it oil tincture out of it and ingesting it, where a sophisticated sort of approach to drug delivery wasn't taken in Canada. And that's where we spent the first 3 years, to make sure the formulations are stable so that when they're in storage, ready to be dispensed by a pharmacist or a medical cannabis sort of outlet, that these products are essentially not degrading. You're not losing the cannabinoids. So that was the approach for the first 3 years. In parallel, we built a vertical integration model out of our operations in Colombia, where we spent the last couple of years building our greenhouse models, our extraction models. We became organic certified by the USDA, took that approach. And over the last 9 months or so, we have commenced the commercialization and revenue generation of those specific businesses. So on the raw material or supply chain side in Colombia, we are exporting now cannabinoids, rare cannabinoids, including CBG, but we are exporting CBD. We're in the process of exporting THC. So we're selling it as a raw material. We're exporting seeds. So we produce feminized seeds for hemp and cannabis. So that's one of our revenue drivers. In Canada, we've recently launched through the largest pharmacy chain in Canada, Shoppers Drug Mart, a medical brand called Row Phyto, and those are providing those formulations. So we have sublingual sprays and oil drops, capsules, topicals, much more advanced formulations. They taste good, they work better, they're dose controlled. So it's a much better experience for the patient, and it's a much better prescription for the physicians. So that's launched. We have a skincare line called Pura, which is now launched in Colombia, about to be launched in the UK and in the United States. It's a line of advanced CBD skincare products that address specific needs, such as acne, eczema, under the eye creams for bangs, and various other applications. So those are the general business models that are commercial now. And in parallel with that, we have a pretty sophisticated clinical pipeline that are more indication-specific drugs in various stages of clinical trials. So that's it. There's a lot there, I know, but that's how we operate as a company.
Wow. So you're certainly busy. And how have you sort of evolved it over the time? Have you sort of monitored the market and how things are changing and sort of pivoted slightly, or were you quite clear about where you were going at the beginning and have stuck to that?
No, absolutely. We consistently look at this market because from a regulation point of view, the regulations consistently change, right? I can tell you that the part that I like about the regulation change is the fact that they're always positive. It's very rare where you get a negative step back by country. You never hear that Australia has now made medical cannabis illegal. It's always progressive in a global setting with respect to how regulations are evolving. It's quite interesting to watch how governments are learning from each other and how the governments are taking particular steps after the mistakes of others. And as the regulations change, we pivot to meet those standards. Luckily, we were right about the trends, about where the future of this industry is going, which is going to be standardized medicine. We always knew we're not going to be on the recreational side. So I don't really care if they're going to let you do gummies or chocolates or not. I care about how am I going to get medicine to patients. And the general pathway that we would like to have taken since the beginning would have been, GMP manufacturing, stability studies, even at least some preclinical studies. And we took that pathway. And it's very nice to see that governments around the world that are now starting to draft final legislation towards legalization of medical cannabis, or recently are essentially demanding a particular quality standard about the product. So even if they're not demanding full clinical development for you to be able to sell medical cannabis in a country like Brazil, they're giving you 5 years to do that. They're at least saying, hey, the manufacturing has to be GMP. It has to have 6 months of stability in various zones of conditions. So that's cool, and that works well in our advantage because we've taken that pathway. So we're monitoring how medical cannabis is evolving, and that's very important. And I think the second part is, for good and bad reasons, we have to monitor where the capital markets are going. We are publicly traded, and the sentiment towards this industry has changed substantially over the last year. A year and a half ago, if you had a website and you said that I want to be in the cannabis business and I may get a license, but I got a website, your market cap was $20 million. If you had a license in Canada or the process of getting a license in Canada, you're worth $50 million. And I think that era is over. The bubble's been burst. So the era of complete speculation over and overvalued companies, in my opinion, are over. But now it's an era where I believe companies like ours at least, are undervalued and underappreciated, and the sector is underinvested because the retail investors, which is predominantly the shareholder base of most cannabis companies, were burnt. Their hearts were broken and their money was lost because of these overvalued companies, essentially the large Canadian ones that did not deliver. So that aspect of the sector is now gone. And now there's a lot of pressure on companies that are still, prior to most companies, which are pre-cash flow positive, to deliver and to essentially slow down and focus on the areas that are going to provide immediate revenue and immediate profits. So I think that's important, coupled with the regulation evolution that's happening in the sector.
Yeah, that's a brilliant summary, and actually leads quite nicely into talking a bit about the capital markets. But obviously it was quite painful 2019 for a lot of Canadian companies from that perspective on the public markets. And then obviously COVID hit. How have you guys dealt with that? It's quite choppy waters.
Yeah, COVID just made things worse. A lot of cannabis companies have gone out of business in the last couple of months, and I find it a bit ironic because they're blaming COVID. And I think the sector was started its meltdown prior to COVID. That meltdown had already started, and COVID certainly accelerated the process and made it a lot easier for some companies to justify essentially going out of business. But for the good companies, I can tell you that COVID has made things harder. Absolutely. Like from a logistics and operations point of view, half of my infrastructure is in Colombia, and I've spent the last 3 years going there every 2 weeks. I haven't been there in 8 months, so I haven't been able to travel. Luckily, I have an incredible team that has executed beyond my wildest dreams without me having to go there. But I'm just using that as an example as to how hard, operations have become. You can't travel, and particular labs that we have in Canada, we work with some of the largest, most important academic institutions in Canada, University of Guelph, University of Toronto. They had to pause operations for a couple of months. So we literally had R&D projects that had to get paused, samples had to get destroyed. So there was certainly impact on that front. We've gone past that now, and things are progressing actually quite well. So COVID had made things quite difficult from an operations perspective, but then from a capital markets perspective, everyone went into defense mode. I think this is where the blue chip stocks have done quite well because everyone is buying them like they're buying gold. But the small cap and mid cap companies, whether they're delivering or not, are just not getting access to capital the way they would have prior to COVID, right? And then when you couple that with the cannabis sector meltdown, it becomes very difficult. So we've certainly seen a difference. But on the other hand, like there is a positive to this, and I think COVID signaled and validated that cannabis, especially on the medical side, is an essential service. We sell, for example, where we sell our products in Canada through Medical Cannabis by Shoppers Drug Mart, their sales are increasing. Their patient count has increased. We saw in the United States that even at a state level, the dispensaries became an essential service. So we're watching cannabis, while the companies are having issues, become a very real sector and an essential one. So that was something remarkable that we saw through COVID.
Yeah, there's been a lot of change, and probably the guys still left standing are hopefully a bit more long term and can really build on from here.
And I think that's what it will be. I think I always tell my team we're going to be one of the last men standing. We're leaders in Canada on the medical side, which allow us to be leaders at a global level, and that's something that you can't replicate on an overnight basis. It's something that took us years of, prestigious clinical development and research and R&D with top people in Canada to do. So we're going to be the winners in that category. And I think the medical cannabis category is massive, from, of course, the drug side, the pharma, the GW pharma sort of Epidiolex, Sativex model, but also from a general standardized medicine offering that will be permitted in various countries, including the UK and Canada today, where the patients haven't had access to that, prescribers haven't had access to that. And the winners of that, I think, are going to have an incredible opportunity within the global market, right?
Yeah.
So this was a shakeout. I think it was more than necessary. We saw this in the dot-com bubble burst. It's a complete replicate of that, like it's exactly what happened. And at that point, you saw, I always use this example, in 1999, Amazon was like a $90 stock. 2001, Amazon became a $5 stock. People weren't looking at Amazon and saying, these guys are the winners. Let's not, short this stock, or let's not sell this stock. But, Amazon is a few $1,000 stock now, because a shakeout had to happen and the winners had to be selected. And that typically happens in these very high pressure, accelerated cleanup moments in the sector.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you're right. If you can survive these sort of very turbulent times, then as the markets further deregulate, you're well placed to sort of take advantage of that, I think.
Yeah, and the demand is growing, sales are growing. We're seeing it on a daily basis, so it's a very real market at a global level. So it's just a matter of time, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in Europe, it unfortunately is moving a bit slower than I think everyone hoped, but particularly in the UK when it comes to medical cannabis, but that's a whole different topic.
But they're allowing it, right, under the special access program. We're in the process of coming in as well.
They are, but it's there aren't enough patients being able to get a hold of it. But okay, cool. Well, thank you for that. I think you mentioned actually one of your product lines is sort of derma and skincare. Could you sort of speak a little bit about, and maybe it's a bit of a 101 on how effective that is as a method of delivery, because obviously it's possibly less bioavailable than if you're vaping it. How do you kind of deal with that, and what are your kind of R&D efforts to maximize the amount that gets into the system through that method?
So when you're talking about a topical delivery, there's two real, I'm going to overly simplify, but I'm going to say there's really two ways to look at it. Do you want it to be delivered to the skin, dermal region, where there is receptor activity and where you can have this basically dermatology benefit? Or are you looking to get past the dermal and get into the muscles and joints and even systemic absorption into the blood? So there's various lines, the various products for that. On the systemic absorption or the deeper delivery, we're talking about our medical line, because that's for patients that are suffering from localized pain, osteoarthritis, fibromyalgia. Man, it's a fantastic line of products, and I can sort of show you, I have a placebo here, or I have this is what it looks like. It's pumped product, and you pump it and you get the cream or the gel. And so something that's more designed for deep tissue, it has penetration enhancers. In some cases, we even have THC in there because you want to get that into muscles and joints. Contrary to that, we have our skincare line, Pura, which is CBD only. It's an over-the-counter product, and it's not designed to be bioavailable within your blood. It's designed to stay within the skin region and have efficacy within the skin. Those are more over-the-counter products. I'll show you what it looks like. For example, this is one of the products, so Pura. So this one is intensive moisturizing cream, is actually designed for dry skin, eczema, psoriasis, those type of products. So there's a separation, and this is where drug delivery, we believe, is very important within the cannabis because what are you using it for? There's a lot of products that are just, I've added CBD to this, but why?
Yeah.
I've seen as far as CBD toilet paper. I think we're just getting a bit crazy now, but CBD hummus, but like, what is the purpose of it? And that's where we're saying, as a medicine, as an active pharmaceutical ingredient, CBD, THC, CBG, they need to be designed for a particular delivery and a particular purpose. And that's where, again, drug delivery comes in.
Yeah. And, at a basic level, you're using non-cannabis agents to assist that delivery, whichever method it is.
And advanced formulations, right? Like the formulations allow that. So one is the delivery, two is to ensure that formulation is stable. Because if you're paying for a product because you like to get the CBD or the THC benefit of it, 3 months later, that product is delivered to you, and you want to make sure that product hasn't degraded, right? If you bought a product that says it's, 500 milligrams, or let's say, 1,000 milligrams of CBD in the oil drop, by the time that you receive that product, even if the label claim was correct, which often it's not in markets like the United Kingdom, by the time you receive that product, if that's just a basic MCT oil formulation, it's quite likely that that's degraded. And even if that hasn't degraded, which I would find remarkable. By the time you ingest it, because that formulation is so basic, it's just MCT oil, the bioavailability is so poor that you're essentially, losing a very high percentage of it. Somewhere between 80 to 90% of it is just being lost. So again, there's a bit of a snake oil kind of frenzy going on with these products. There is real efficacy related to CBD and THC, but I think the drug delivery part was completely neglected by most of the companies in the sector.
Yeah, kind of riding that marketing hype wave, I suppose.
Exactly.
Cool. Well, thank you for that. That's a really good sort of rundown on topicals. We've not really covered it much on the show, so good to make that sort of broad distinction between the two sort of categories. What are some of the other sort of exciting parts of R&D that you're undertaking? Because it's really clear that, it's a real focus for you guys.
Well, we look at the raw product line, which, as I was mentioning, is different deliveries and what they each do. So a sublingual spray, for example, is designed to be absorbed through the tongue, designed to have very fast acting, which the sensation is actually quite similar to inhalation because it goes right into your bloodstream, as does smoking or inhaling. And you're avoiding metabolism, you're bypassing first pass metabolism, which is great for someone that needs an acute relief, for neuropathic pain, cancer pain, palliative care, depression, anxiety. These are areas where immediate relief is essentially necessary. So that's been an exciting area for us today. Our manufacturing partners, MediPharm in Canada, we're very excited to press release that they've launched our product line within Shoppers Drug Mart. So that was pretty cool. We have the capsules that we like because they're dose controlled. They're SEDs, which are self-emulsifying sort of microparticles, which is cool because as soon as you ingest these capsules, they expand within your stomach. You have much higher bioavailability. And what we like about them is that the dose is consistent every single time. Even our sublingual sprays or oil drops are dosed. We know how much each spray is. So it's designed, for example, that each spray is 1 milligram of THC. And that allows patients to titrate. That allows the patient to say, hey, today I'm going to start with one spray, see how I feel after 2 hours. And if the sensation was okay, I didn't have an adverse event, I'm going to increase that to 2 sprays. And a doctor can go through that process with the patient. You can do that when the label is accurate, the dosing is consistent. When the product is consistent. You can't do that when you're buying a product and you have no idea what's inside of it, which is really scary. So these are some of the delivery mechanisms. We are in the final stages of development for sublingual tablet. So a tablet you put under your tongue, dissolves, again, acute relief. Sustained release tablet, which we haven't really seen in the sector. And this is really interesting because if we can get 8 to 10 hours of consistent release, so picture a patient consumes a 10 milligram THC tablet and it's releasing about 1 milligram an hour. You're avoiding a spike within the system, a really high feeling or sensation, and then a crash. You're getting more of a consistent delivery as you would with like a Tylenol or Advil, sustained release. So that's some of the other projects that are going to be coming into the market later this year. We have a transdermal patch program, which we're very excited about. Stick a patch on your arm, sustained release, no smell, no odor, no drops, no inhalation, anything. And that's an area that we've seen used, or that's a delivery we've seen used more so recently with nicotine, with even opioids as for chronic pain patients. It's an area where doctors feel comfortable prescribing. So we're getting much closer to bringing those to the market, and we're pretty excited about that. So there's a lot of development on that side. And then in parallel, we have a drug development program where we look at specific ratios of particular cannabinoids, in some cases with other drugs. And then we take that through the clinical phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 pathway. And that's a very different pathway than the medical cannabis. But the data that we generate today from selling the medical cannabis and to have the medical cannabis roll branded products under real world evidence trials, which we're part of several, gives us more data, gives us more signals, and allows us to then target more specifically the pharmaceutical pathways we want to take. So the combination of the two is pretty interesting.
Yeah, wow, there's so much there. Usually interesting, but I mean, it feels like you're really taking a lot of this kind of established practices and applying them to cannabis that exist in the kind of wider pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah, and I think that's why we're very well respected. I mean, within the cannabis sector and within the medical community, at least here in Canada so far. I know we're in Latin America as well. We've taken a very serious approach since the beginning. We've had lots of opportunities to enter the recreational side of this business, and we've simply stayed out. We're taking a very serious approach to research, to clinical. We've partnered with the leading academic and clinical institutions here in Canada, which we're pretty excited about. And where that's taken us over the last 3-4 years is amazing products, amazing intellectual property and patents, but also credibility. You know, the thought leaders and key opinion leaders in Canada know Avicanna, and they know that we're a serious company. So if they're going to prescribe products and recommend products, it's very likely that they're going to select ours versus a company that also sells joints under the same brand. You know, and I think that separation is quite simple, but it's been neglected. And some of those companies are now trying to focus on medical, but they just don't have, one, the bandwidth, the sophistication, but also the credibility within the medical community, which I think is key.
Yeah, very much so.
They can't be bought, right? Like, key opinion leaders are not bought. Key opinion leaders, you have to earn their respect. You have to protect their reputations. And knowing that we're not a recreational company in any way, knowing that we take a very serious approach, they feel comfortable and they get past the stigma of cannabis because of that position that we take.
Yeah. That's great. Are you you mentioned you work with a lot of Canadian institutions. Are you working with any international institutions as well? Or, I mean, international sort of cooperation on learnings is obviously quite key to developing the global industry. How do you see that all hanging together?
I think, to be frank, we focus on where commercial imperatives are on the medical launch. So if I'm launching Row in Canada, the focus is today to do a number of real-world evidence trials in Canada. We're launching Row, I believe, in end of September or early October in the United Kingdom. It's important for us to collaborate there. So the key to building a relationship with the medical community is to show them that you're willing to dedicate effort into research and clinical work. And so we will prioritize in markets that we have access to get into, to do some more real world evidence trials, you know, to work with a physician, let's say a key opinion leader in London is that wants to focus on, for example, Parkinson's disease, and say, well, here, prescribe X amount of products for your patients, and let's monitor them. Let's look at the endpoints. Let's see how it's helping them from a comorbidities perspective, or even specific Parkinson's endpoint perspective. And that creates more credibility, that creates relations and dialogue. But with that said, we have been focused on building more of these academic and clinical research collaborations, specifically in Europe and Latin America. But we're in Mars, which is the kind of the biotech Silicon Valley of Canada. And there's on University Avenue where we are, they call it the hospital row, because you have all the major hospitals of Canada, the most significant ones, within the same row. You know, they're all kind of, and we're in the center of that. So a lot of that research, product development, clinical work is all happening within sort of a 500 meter radius. And we want to get that right and then replicate that elsewhere. So that's where a lot of our focus has been.
Yeah, it sounds like you're in the right place to get involved in that. So perfect. Cool. So as we sort of get towards the sort of tail end of the interview, one question I wanted to ask was, you know, there's clearly you're focused on the plant. What's your view on sort of synthetic or biosynthetic cannabinoids?
I think there's a unique opportunity in the biosynthetic to force the plant or to genetically modify the plant, or its sort of pathways to develop some of the rare cannabinoids. Like, I'm talking about super rare cannabinoids that either we haven't even, you know, discovered yet, or have discovered at very, very, very minor express levels. And then to take those particular cannabinoids and try to identify what they actually do from a mechanistic perspective, from a receptor activity perspective, and then to build drugs from those. I think it's a crazy pathway to take, but I like it, and I think there's an opportunity there. If you're going to be producing synthetically or biosynthetically CBD, THC, CBG, CBC, CBN, I don't personally agree with that pathway. Like, those 5 cannabinoids are pretty well expressed. We developed a genetic from breeding, DNA-led breeding, that has 17% CBG. And I can produce that in Colombia, organically certified, sustainable, botanical, natural, for significantly cheaper than the companies that are claiming they can produce synthetic or biosynthetic CBG in 3 years. I'm already doing it. I just my Monday press release was industrial export of CBG into the United States. And I'm producing it already significantly cheaper. And I think both from a medical perspective and also from a consumer perspective, what sounds better? Organic, sustainable, botanical, or genetically modified, right? I mean, I think that matters. And I think the challenge here is historically, whenever we find or we identify a compound that we want to produce for pharmaceutical purposes, we have two options. We can cultivate it if it's naturally derived from a plant like cannabis, which is an excellent producer of cannabinoids. We can cultivate it within a developed country factory model, which like the Canadian licensed producers, and then we build that into a GMP consistent cultivation, GMP consistent extraction, isolation. Great, that costs a lot. So if you compare that to producing it through algae or yeast or E. coli, or to produce it through chemical synthesis, then that will probably cost, if you get it right, those synthetic processes will probably cost less. But what if we take that plant and we produce it in a developing country where the climate and the environment is ideal, such as Colombia? And then we replicate pharmaceutical standards and we make that into a GMP cultivation, extraction, isolation. Now, my cost there is substantially cheaper than even the synthetic in Canada or United States. So that's the gap, right? It's, do you want to grow it? No, it doesn't cost too much to grow botanically. Let's produce it synthetically. But what if you were to grow it in a developing country and apply those pharmaceutical standards? That, I think, is the ultimate goal, and that is sustainable. The impact on the environment is a positive one. Right? We don't, like, if you've seen videos, and I would invite you to Google it or YouTube or whatever, you can see videos of our cultivation projects in Colombia. It's gorgeous. You have fields and greenhouses, and the one thing you won't see is lights or air conditioners or fans. So we're sustainable, and those plants are absorbing a significant amount of CO2. So yeah, I'm on the botanical side, but I do believe in the synthetic and biosynthetic and chemical synthetic pathways for the rare, super rare cannabinoids and their potential.
Yeah, I think I agree. It's for the hard to get to cannabinoids, it might be very useful to have that biosynthetic option. Cool. Well, look, Aras, thank you so much. That's been brilliant. It's great to hear real passion about what you do, and guys have got a great focus. So I'm sure there'll be loads more to talk about in the future. It'd be great to have you back on at some point.
Absolutely. Yeah. Nice to meet you, and pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
No, it's been great. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.
Cheers. Thanks for joining me for that. Hope you enjoyed the show. If you did enjoy it, please hit subscribe on whichever podcast platform you use. I'd also love a nice 5-star review on iTunes if you have the time. You can also follow the Cannabis Conversation page on LinkedIn, and also sign up to my mailing list via cannabis-conversation.com. Until next week, have a good one.